On August 6, 1945, America dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. 3 days later, America dropped another. But here's what almost everyone gets wrong. The second bomb wasn't simply, Hiroshima didn't work. Drop another. The American military had already authorized the use of additional atomic bombs before Hiroshima had even happened. And after Hiroshima, Japan still didn't surrender. Then the Soviet Union invaded. Then Nagasaki was destroyed. And somehow, Japan still didn't immediately surrender. Inside Tokyo, the government was split. The emperor had to intervene. And then Japanese officers tried to stop the surrender by force. So why did America drop 2 atomic bombs? To understand that, we have to go inside the final days of the Japanese Empire. By the summer of 1945, Japan was losing. Its navy had been shattered. Its merchant fleet was being destroyed. American submarines were cutting the country off from oil, food, and raw materials. Its cities were being devastated by conventional bombing. Its economy was collapsing. And the Japanese military knew an American invasion of the homeland was becoming increasingly likely. But Japan still refused to simply surrender. That sounds irrational. Until you understand what Japanese leaders were actually trying to accomplish. By this point, many were no longer seriously expecting to defeat America outright. Instead, they hoped to make defeat so expensive that America would accept better terms. Japan prepared for a final battle on its own territory. Its military planned to mobilize enormous numbers of soldiers and civilians. The strategy was simple in concept. If America invaded, make the price unbearable. The Japanese leadership hoped that enough American casualties might force Washington to negotiate. And there was another possibility. Japan was desperately hoping the Soviet Union might act as a mediator. If Moscow could negotiate between Tokyo and the Allies, perhaps Japan could end the war without completely surrendering the imperial system. So Japan's remaining strategy rested on 2 hopes. Fight long enough to improve the terms. And use the Soviet Union to help find a way out. Then America acquired a weapon that could change the calculation completely. America's problem was different. The United States had already seen what fighting Japan could cost. Okinawa had been horrific. Japanese forces had resisted with extraordinary determination. Civilian deaths were enormous. And now American planners were preparing for an invasion of the Japanese home islands. But the atomic bomb wasn't America's only option. There was the blockade. There was continued conventional bombing. There was waiting for Soviet intervention. And there was invasion. Every option carried enormous costs. Then, on July 16, 1945, something happened in the New Mexico desert. The first atomic bomb exploded at Trinity. For the first time in human history, a weapon had released destructive energy on a completely different scale. America now possessed a weapon Japan had never seen. And Washington decided it would be used. But here's the part that changes our entire understanding of the story. On July 25th, before Hiroshima, American military authorities issued instructions authorizing the first atomic mission and anticipating additional bombs as they became available. That means the second bomb wasn't necessarily a completely new decision made after Hiroshima. The machinery for repeated atomic attacks was already being prepared. America didn't yet know exactly how Japan would react to the first bomb, but it was already preparing for what might come next. And then, the first bomb arrived. August 6, 1945, 8:15 in the morning. AB-29 released the weapon over Hiroshima. Seconds later, the city disappeared beneath an enormous explosion. Buildings collapsed. Fire spread across the city. Thousands died almost immediately. Thousands more would die from injuries and radiation. The world had entered the nuclear age. But here's the question. Did Japan surrender? No, not immediately. Hiroshima shocked Japan. But shock wasn't surrender. Japanese leaders struggled to understand exactly what had happened. Some military officials questioned whether America could actually produce many atomic bombs. Japan itself had investigated atomic weapons and understood the enormous technical difficulty involved. Perhaps America had one. Perhaps a few. But could America really destroy Japanese cities one after another? Some Japanese leaders were not convinced. And Japan still had an army. It still had weapons. It still believed an invasion could inflict catastrophic losses on America. So while Hiroshima burned, Tokyo continued debating. Japan had not surrendered. And this is where the story takes an extraordinary turn. Because while Japan was trying to understand Hiroshima, the Soviet Union was preparing to enter the war. August 8th. Japan was still hoping Moscow might help negotiate an end to the war. That hope was about to disappear. Late that night, the Soviet Union declared war on Japan, and Soviet forces began moving into Japanese-held Manchuria. For Tokyo, this was a catastrophe. Japan had been trying to use the Soviet Union as a diplomatic bridge to the Allies. Now that bridge had become an enemy army. Japan was suddenly facing the United States and the Soviet Union. Then came August 9th. At 11:02 in the morning, America dropped another atomic bomb, Nagasaki. But this is where the conventional story becomes misleading. The second bomb did not fall on a Japanese government that had calmly decided, Hiroshima was terrible. We should surrender. It fell while Japan's leadership was already trapped in a political crisis. The Supreme War Council was divided. Three powerful figures wanted to accept the Allied terms if the imperial institution could be preserved. Three senior military leaders wanted additional guarantees. Japan had now experienced Hiroshima, Soviet entry, Nagasaki, and still, there was no unanimous decision to surrender, because the real battle had moved inside Tokyo. Japan's leaders were no longer arguing simply about whether they could win. They were arguing about how Japan would lose. The peace faction understood that continuing the war could destroy the country. But the military leadership still believed Japan possessed enough strength to make an invasion extraordinarily costly. If America invaded, Japan could still fight. If Japan could still fight, perhaps it could still negotiate. And beneath all of this was the question that mattered most. What would happen to the emperor? For Japan's leaders, surrender threatened the entire political structure they had fought to preserve. That is why Hiroshima alone did not produce an immediate surrender. And it is why Nagasaki alone did not produce one either. The bombs were creating enormous pressure. But pressure still had to become a political decision. And Japan's leadership was deadlocked. So something happened that was extremely unusual. The emperor intervened. In the early hours of August 10th, Hirohito supported accepting the Potsdam Declaration. While seeking protection for the imperial institution, Japan had finally moved toward surrender. But this was not yet the end. Japan's offer was conditional. And now the decision moved across the Pacific. To Washington. America's response came through Secretary of State James Burns. The Allied answer did not simply abolish the emperor, but it made something very clear. The emperor and Japanese government would be subject to the authority of the Allied occupation commander. The future political structure of Japan would ultimately depend on the will of the Japanese people. To the peace faction, this offered a possible way forward. To military hardliners, it looked like the destruction of Japanese sovereignty. And so Japan hesitated again. August 11th, August 12th, August 13th. The government continued arguing. Still divided. Still afraid. Still searching for a way to end the war without completely destroying the system they had fought to preserve. On August 13th, the cabinet was still deadlocked. The Japanese military leadership continued to argue that Japan still possessed the ability to fight. Prime Minister Suzuki knew the government was running out of time. The decision had to be made. There was only one authority capable of breaking the deadlock. The emperor. Again. And on August 14th, Hirohito made the final decision. Japan would accept the Allied terms. The war would end. But then, something happened that almost stopped it. The emperor's surrender message was recorded. It would be broadcast to the Japanese people. For the first time, ordinary Japanese citizens would hear their emperor acknowledge defeat. But senior and junior military officers were determined to prevent that from happening. A group of army officers began plotting a coup. Their objective was extraordinary. Seize the imperial palace. Stop the recording. Prevent the surrender. Keep the war going. During the night of August 14th, the conspirators moved. They killed the commander of the Imperial Guard. They forged orders. They entered the palace. And they searched for the recording. The recording that could end the war. but they couldn't find it. The senior military leadership did not ultimately support the rebellion. The coup collapsed. The recording survived. And on August 15th, the Japanese people finally heard their emperor's voice. Japan would surrender. The war was ending. But now we can finally return to the question we started with. Why did America drop 2 atomic bombs? The easiest answer is, because one wasn't enough. But history is more complicated. Hiroshima did not immediately produce surrender. Japan's leaders were still divided. They were still hoping to preserve the imperial system. They were still considering how to negotiate. And they still believed they might be able to make an invasion painfully expensive. Then the Soviet Union entered the war. That destroyed Japan's hope of using Moscow as a mediator. Then Nagasaki was destroyed. But even that did not instantly produce a unanimous Japanese decision. Because by then, the decisive struggle was happening inside Tokyo. The emperor had to break the political deadlock. Japan then tried to accept surrender terms while preserving the imperial institution. The Allies responded. Japan debated again. And finally, Hirohito made the decision to accept. Even then, the military nearly stopped him. So the real story isn't Bomb 1, Bomb 2, Japan surrenders. The real story is that by August 1945, Japan's remaining strategies were collapsing simultaneously. The atomic bomb demonstrated that America possessed a weapon capable of destroying a city in a single attack. The Soviet invasion destroyed Japan's diplomatic strategy. The blockade and bombing had devastated the country's ability to sustain the war. The prospect of invasion threatened catastrophic destruction. And inside Tokyo, the political system was reaching the point where the emperor himself had to break the deadlock. So did the atomic bombs matter? Absolutely. Did the Soviet invasion matter? Absolutely. Did Japan's military and economic collapse matter? Absolutely. But the historical evidence does not require us to choose one magical explanation. Because Japan didn't surrender after one event. It surrendered when the options for continuing the war collapsed faster than its leaders could replace them. And that is what makes the story of the 2 atomic bombs so extraordinary. America did not drop the second bomb into an empty political vacuum. It dropped it into a Japan already approaching the edge. While its diplomacy was collapsing, its military was collapsing, its economy was collapsing, and its government was struggling to decide whether surrender itself was acceptable. And after all of that, Japan still almost refused to surrender. The final battle of World War II was therefore not simply fought between America and Japan. It was fought inside Japan itself. And perhaps that is the most important thing to understand about the end of the war. The atomic bombs did not create Japan's collapse from nothing. They arrived at the moment when almost every remaining strategy Japan had left was failing at once. That is why America dropped too.